there's this ongoing thing the Chinese Communist Party is trying to do of like rewriting the history of COVID. We did an episode on that, and thankfully YouTube age restricted that because thank you, YouTube, so much. YouTube's going to get a new CEO, by the way. I'm kind of afraid of what
You
that
don't
will
think
mean.
things will get better?
Has anything that we've seen and experienced doing these shows made you think things get better?
Okay. Fair point.
So FYI, subscribing to us on like Patreon or Locals is a good way to stay in touch with us in case YouTube's new CEO is not a nice person. I don't know.
Well, speaking of, I think I know why that YouTube episode got age restricted, actually. It's because we talked about the CCP, persecuting people. And there was video of some police officers like arresting Falun Gong people on Tiananmen Square, which is an old video that we've used multiple times before.
It's like they're beating some guy up outside a van, right?
Yeah, and then we've used it a ton of times before, but like only because people have started mass reporting us in the last couple of years. Have like any time we have anything that shows Chinese police brutality, that episode will get age restricted.
Yeah, even if it's just protests in China.
Yeah, or like once or twice it was like the Uyghurs, the blindfolded Uyghurs, or the Uyghurs, like that photo of Uyghurs being in prison garb and stuff like that. Yeah, so that'll be...
It's too disturbing to let people know what's actually happening in China, so
only the children, only people under 18, Matt. Meanwhile, if you've ever seen kids' YouTube, there's like a lot of weird stuff on there.
Horror show, absolute horror show.
But I mean, it's not that we think that there are a lot of under 18-year-olds watching us, but if you're not signed into YouTube, you can't see it.
It also affects how YouTube will recommend videos. Like age-restricted videos don't get recommended.
Right.
So it like always kills the view. So this nice episode we put a bunch of work into showing how the Chinese Communist Party is trying to rewrite the history of COVID and cover it up. Thankfully, no one will see that now because of YouTube. Thanks.
It's almost like what we tried to expose has been covered up.
Yeah, maybe we should write our messages on balloons. That's not a terrible idea.
That is something that people have done, actually.
Like South Koreans sending balloons into
Propaganda
North Korea
from balloons.
with like pamphlets or even USB sticks.
Even when we were in Jingmen, I think there was like stuff like that where they would like, because the Chinese side would be like shelling Jingmen with like propaganda shells that had like propaganda on the inside. And then the other side, they were blasting like propaganda messages with the huge speakers, and they would send balloons across. Remember we did the thing where we were going to send a balloon across?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
This is Jinmen spelled with a K. That's the island belonging to Taiwan that's only a couple miles off the coast of mainland China. Jinmen.
Yeah, that episode we did back in 2018? Yeah.
Yeah, it was Beardless Chris.
Oh, that's
Remember
right.
Beardless Chris?
No, I blocked it out.
Are you trying to rewrite history?
Chris has always had a beard.
I've always had a beard from the day I was born. From the day I hatched out of an egg on top of a rainbow mountain. Destined to be supreme leader of these United States for life, which is an eternity.
So anyway, so
Hey,
the Chinese Communist
Speaking
Party...
of really stupid things to say,
Uh-oh.
China declared victory over COVID.
Over the exit wave, at least.
Yeah, over the exit wave.
Yeah, so...
There's a caveat there, which is that they can then define what exit wave means. They could define that later.
I would like any definition of exit wave. What is an exit wave?
Well, I mean, I think what they mean is that like the big COVID wave that happened because they stopped zero COVID is now over and everyth's fine.
Yeah.
Let's get the economy going.
It was not because they stopped zero COVID.
Oh, yes. Like it had started already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The wave was already coming in.
But some of this propaganda here is great because they're like, oh, more than 200 million people access medical services. Nearly 800,000 severe cases received proper treatment. And the country's COVID-19 fatality rate remained the world's lowest. China has created a miracle in human history.
Wow.
Yes.
And meanwhile, the evil U.S. empire is covering up, poisoning its own people. I mean, you just need to make the comparison, and it's obvious.
This is not going to age well when like people in 5 or 10 years discover that like actually like
Millions of people died?
millions, maybe tens of millions or more have died from COVID, and it was covered up for years.
Well, fortunately, it's going to take a long time for them to make those decisions, those discoveries, because guess what? China is not actually allowing the WHO to continue its investigations into the origin of COVID in China.
Who's shocked by this, right?
I wonder if there is somebody who is shocked by it.
Maybe the WHO?
Yeah, like, how could they do this to us? We did everything they did. We did everything they asked of us.
But yeah, I mean, I'm just still stunned that like they're blatant lying about the country's fatality rate remaining the world's lowest. Like,
yeah,
because they're lying about your fatality rate. That's why.
Well, it's also because there were specific instructions sent to doctors and hospitals and nurses about to not count deaths with COVID as deaths from COVID. So basically,
I mean, to put anything except COVID on the death certificate, if at all possible, basically.
Right. Yeah. So that affects the statistics.
Also, they only counted hospital deaths, so you had
All
to
the
have
rural people
died in a hospital.
Wasn't there something about? Were you telling me about something about like a mass grave or something somebody found?
Oh no, it was the BBC had gone to a rural area to see how the COVID wave was doing there, and we've seen all those videos of like crematoriums being overwhelmed and like bodies piled up and people like waiting in line, you know. But in rural areas, like there aren't that many crematoriums, and traditionally people were buried. And so there was just these photos that the BBC had taken of just these fields full of graves. It wasn't a mass grave. It was just like lots of graves in the fields, and from this COVID wave, because like they didn't have the capacity to like go take them somewhere to be burned. So they just like buried them in the fields. Yeah, and all those people are unaccounted for, essentially, right?
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, what I'm sure whatever's happening in the rural countryside is really scary, because that's where a lot of elderly people live who are more susceptible to COVID. Poor sanitation, poor medical treatments.
Yeah, not a lot of accessible treatment. Yeah, it's very...
Yeah, so, and there's like, what did we say, like 500 million people living in the countrysides?
Something like that.
Yeah, it's a lot of people. So yeah, it really could be, the death toll could be astronomical.
Well, I mean, it definitely is going to be astronomical compared to their admitted death toll.
Their admitted number.
Right. And probably also compared to the United States or most developed countries too.
Yeah.
I don't just mean in terms of raw numbers, but it could be a much higher per capita death rate as well.
I mean, we just won't know, I think. Like, the CCP may have made it impossible to know, essentially.
Yeah, definitely. Which reminds me, we should also talk a bit about the Wuhan healthcare reform protests. But let's finish up talking about this particular COVID thing.
You mentioned the WHO is not going to be able to continue their investigation into the origins of COVID. Well,
you know where the WHO should be investigating the origins of COVID, Shelley?
I do, Matt.
That's because we listen to Chinese state-run media.
So they suggested that the WHO ought to look into Fort Detrick in the United States.
Yeah, they suggested it multiple times over the last week.
I'm amazed that they're still hammering that one away.
Well, I mean, it's the whole thing where they have to deflect by blaming. It's like they can't take responsibility for anything,
so
right?
So they blame others for doing what they did.
It's like, the real victim here is the CCP.
Well, that's a mark of what communism is all about. You blame everyone else for your problems.
Basically. And then, so in terms of the COVID thing and the deflection, it's like, all right, well, if you claim that it's from a biolab in Wuhan, we have to do that.
There was a biolab in America.
Yeah, and like they even had produced this whole documentary about Fort Detrick and all the scary things, and like they weren't actually able to connect COVID directly to Fort Detrick, but it was just kind of like this background, like all of the terrible things that happen in the U.S., and they'll bring up like past things like the Tuskegee experiment, which was legitimately awful.
Mhm.
And, something that like ethically people shouldn't have been doing, but that doesn't have anything to do with COVID. But that's what they'll do to like deflect the attention from, people blaming them. And the WHO was going to, the investigation was supposed to be doing all these studies in China. And that's the part where, for some reason, the Chinese regime is not cooperating with letting the WHO do studies in China.
But why should they cooperate? Because it didn't come from China. It came from Fort Detrick, Shelley.
Yeah.
Yeah, the WHO should send its investigators there.